Kia ora koutou, everybody. My name is Greg Shanahan. I'm the Managing Director of Technology Investment Network. And we're all here today to discuss the findings of TIN's incredible Agritech report. The report was launched during field days, but we wanted to create the opportunity to have a discussion with some industry stakeholders around what was happening in Agritech. So thank you for joining us today. There are a number of people tuning in from overseas, so welcome to you. There's about over 220 people have registered for this event, so lots of people out there listening in. The webinar will last for an hour. The structure for it will be, I'll, after this presentation, give a very brief update on the findings of the report. Then we'll have a Q&A from between myself and our panelists, and then open it up to the Q&A from the chat. So all attendees are muted. The chat box is there for you to ask questions during the course of the event, and Brendan will moderate those questions towards the end. So thank you for everyone for coming. Thank you to the incredible TIN team, to Brendan and Jane and their team who put the report together, and to Sebastian and Bettina who've organised this event. So we've got a fantastic lineup of panelists. Dean Tilliard, the venture partner for Finisterre. Dean, if you just want to maybe wave, or Forgent, the Chief Science Officer of Biolumic. You can see Jason behind in the flax bushes there, down in Palmerston North, I think you're based, Jason. Lila Delkovic, the co-founder of Cropsy, an exciting company in the imaging space. Alicia D'Souza, Corporate Development Manager from LIC. Dylan Hughes, Sales and Partnership of UBCO, going gangbusters, just had a fantastic capital raise. And Brendan Ma, the International Market Manager for Latin America. So I'd also like to thank our sponsors. So in particular, NZTE, EMB, Callaghan Innovation, CEDA, Hamilton City Council, and James and Wells. So this is the second Agritech report, following up from the one we did last year. So why Agritech? Agritech provides the opportunity to leverage cost savings and add value and scale up the important primary sector for New Zealand. There's increasingly a great amount of diversity in the sector. So as well as growing the primary sector, we get the opportunity to expand in agritech products in New Zealand's fast-growing tech sector, which is now the second largest source of offshore revenue for New Zealand. What's changed? The world's changed significantly since COVID-19. There've been challenges in terms of supply chains for the sector, further investment in the sector, and growing issues post-COVID around sustainability. So firstly, a few key points about the sector. The agritech sector is the second largest market sector in the TIN 200 report. There are 22 companies in the TIN report, but in fact, 133 companies in the total ecosystem. They have combined revenues of 1.4 billion, and they're growing around 8% per annum on a 5-year CAGR basis. The sector is mature, with the average age of those companies being around 25 years of age. So the sector employs close to 5,000 people, but an interesting fact in terms of the contribution to New Zealand, the average wage per sector is around $94,000. And if we look at the metrics on the right-hand side of the screen, one of the things that distinguishes the sector is significant profitability, ahead of the average for the tin sector more broadly. The R&D spend at 7.6% is slightly below that of the average, but within that, you've got the heavy spend of the health tech sector. So one of the key phenomena for the agritech sector, obviously a lot of these firms have grown up in New Zealand, so around about 43% of the revenue comes from within New Zealand, a quarter from the United States, which is the mainstay. But distinguishing the agritech sector and the tech sector more broadly, what we've seen in the previous 12 months is significant growth in what we'd call tertiary markets. So Europe, Asia, and Latin America have all demonstrated strong growth as these companies really expand their wings. The good thing from the New Zealand perspective is these 103 companies that are in the ecosystem, 133 companies that are in the ecosystem, are spread across all provinces. The weight of the, in terms of the large companies like NDA, LIC, and Gallagher's, is heavily focused on the Hamilton Waikato region. But across the country, from Tauranga down to Southland, we find a broad spread of opportunities. And so there's a significant opportunity with the growth of the sector to stimulate regional growth. In terms of investment, the ITP in the agritech sector, one of the things it's designed to promote was investment. And the 2020 year, in terms of angel investment, there were a modest 7 investments worth about $8.6 million, an average deal size of 1.2 million. But we see more recently in the venture capital space, significant investment. Halter raised $32 million in 2021. As we're saying, UBCO's just raised over, I think it's Dylan, 15 million. It's a significant funding coming into Robotics Plus from the ACC Impact Fund, but also significant investment historically from Yamaha Motor Ventures in the United States. So what are the areas that are growing and some of the hot companies? Agritech, Oxen Smart Machine and Robotics Plus, all in the automation, robotics area, in both greenhouses for Agritech and orchards and vineyards for the other two. Cropsea and visioning and its systems and orchards, ecogas in terms of biogas and fertilizer from bio waste, UBCO electric bikes, Hot Lime Lab in terms of carbon systems for greenhouses, and way beyond for farm automation systems. So there's a promising batch of startups coming through and a growing amount of collaboration between startups and corporates, organizations like and companies like LIC and Gallagher's are engaging more deeply with the sector. So moving forward globally, there's a sea change going on in terms of supply chains, provision of food around climate change, and opportunities for further growth from the sector, with growing investment and a large number of companies increasingly involved. So part of the discussion today is really to talk about what can we do to enable further growth. So we're now going to pass across to our panel. I'll get each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves in terms of who they are and where they're from, and then start by answering the question, what is driving agritech innovation forward in New Zealand and what is holding it back? Maybe we'll go across my screen from left to right. Dylan, if you could start, please.
Good morning, team. What is driving agritech innovation forward in New Zealand? Look, I think in New Zealand, we're a very resourceful country. So we're generally strong at adopting and practically applying new technology and innovations. In terms of what I think is holding it back, in some areas it's been funding. There's been a little bit of red tape helping through that. But also I think the adoption of digital connectivity, I think moving forward, digital will play a big part in terms of products, software, hardware working together and supplying a full digital platform. So I think at the moment that's probably what's holding us back, but we're, as I say, we're very innovative and we will move forward very quickly.
Thanks, Dylan. Brendan?
Yeah, good morning, Brendan Maher from New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. From our perspective, I think the big driver is around the productivity and efficiency gains. You know, the farmers and producers are calling out for this as they're trying to be more competitive with their global competitors, trying to get more out of the resources they have available. And this also builds into those sustainability credentials. And this seems to have intensified over recent years. I think from what's holding it back, what we see is a bit of technology uptake, and that's not just in New Zealand, but globally. Depending on the markets, you know, there's a real traditional way of doing things. So there's more of a reluctance to uptake some of that technology. So how do you overcome some of those barriers and get those farmers or producers to take up some of these new solutions? Thanks.
Jason.
Kia ora, everyone. Yeah, I'm Jason Wargent, Chief Science Officer of Biolemic. We're a biotech company in Palmerston North and the United States, and we program plants with light. I don't think there are numerous factors holding us back in New Zealand, but I think you know, one factor is developing this more ecosystem-wide appreciation in NZ that building a valuable agtech company takes time and requires a certain steely grit and yet patience at the same time. You know, absolutely is a marathon and not a sprint, and yet perhaps that's not always front and center to all of the conversations that we have in New Zealand. So I think patience is a word for sure.
Thanks, Jason. Dean?
Hi everyone, Dean Tilliard from Finistère Ventures. I think New Zealand Agritech has been driven by the same trends that are operating globally. You know, the big driver is sustainability, but also rates of technical adoption, and that's increasing, and that's been mentioned. I think there's lots of things that we could do better to make things go faster. One of the big items for us is the amount of IP that we're realising out of our Public Research Institute. We'd certainly like to see more companies being able to access that, and that we can grow companies with, you know, really good depth of unique IP. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Dean. Alicia.
Everyone, Alicia D'Souza from LIC. I'm the Corporate Development Manager looking globally for new opportunities in Agritech for the dairy industry in New Zealand. So in terms of what's driving us forward, I think there's a real need for Agritech. So we have to grow more food in the next 40 years than we have since the start of civilization, and that's quite a strong problem that we're focused on. I think New Zealand has a strong and developing ecosystem in Agritech with networks like NZTE, Callaghan Innovation, Sprout Agritech, which is accelerating and incubating these agritech companies. However, there are a lot of challenges as well in terms of what's holding us back. Location-wise, we're a bit away from the rest of the world, and a lot of the opportunities are international. So sometimes that location and distance can get in the way. And also, I think moving faster to commercialization. So you need a strong pipeline of ideas feeding in, but also moving through the pipeline and getting out the other end into real products. And part of the challenge there, like Jason mentioned, is that there's a really long time to development and actually create these into products. So you need to have that risk appetite to keep investing and getting these products developed.
Cool, thanks, Alicia. Leila?
Hi everyone, I'm Leila, from a co-founder at Cropsy Technologies. We're an ag tech startup based in Auckland. We're transforming high-value fruit growing with a scalable and adaptable technology. So I'm probably going to echo a lot of the sentiments said by everyone else. Definitely the drivers for Agritech are sticks more than carrots, labour shortages, changing climate and regulatory pressures, which are all really big drivers on companies and innovation. But I think a lot of what's holding it back is a lot of red tape, and I guess some of the technologies being developed aren't in tune with what the needs of the end user actually are, and that's probably a symptom of why we're seeing these technologies not getting adopted as much.
Thanks, Leila. Alicia, just to come back to you for a sec, from some of the things that you said, do you think that supply chains have been disrupted by COVID-19? Is that a challenge or not?
Not in all of Agritech. So I
Yes.
guess in the digital space, not as much for LIC. I guess with the genetics that we sell internationally, there was quite a bit of disruption there, and just finding the flights to put products on became very, very challenging over the last year.
Yeah. And Dean, Finisterre is not alone, but unique in New Zealand in many ways, and being specialising in this space. How would you describe the investment environment for agritech companies?
Yeah, well, I think we are in unusual times, and if I think back to last March, when all of our businesses were massively disrupted and we started looking ahead, I don't think any of us would have predicted that in the venture capital world for Agritech that there would be 50% increase in the level of investment to a record amount of 23 billion globally. There's a lot of investment going on. If you look into the data, there's some interesting things happening. Investors with conviction of companies are investing more into those companies, so they're going longer. The rounds are also larger. So, that in the competitive situation for a lot of New Zealand startups, they're facing, sometimes inferior technology with international competitors, but these competitors are much well resourced. We're seeing New Zealand companies get larger rounds as well, and you mentioned Halter earlier on as an example of that. So, look, it's really buoyant, the investment world. It's also clouded by high levels of uncertainty. So, investors are aware of the risks that are still around. So we're taking very careful steps. It means that investing through syndicates is really important, and it's one thing at Finisterre that I think we do really well, as we look to invest with a syndicate that can add multiple points of value to a company and be there when the times are uncertain. So, in sum, I think it's a great time to raise money, but we're all reading news headlines very eagerly to see what the next 18 months looks like.
Awesome. Dylan, UBCO's been a company that's been successful in raising money just recently with the closure of your $15 million round. What are the biggest challenges for satisfying the aspirations of your investors now in terms of growing the business in a world impacted by COVID-19?
Yeah, look, good question. A lot of the capital raising is off the back of ideas of moving the company forward. Obviously, with COVID, some of the biggest challenges at the moment is the inability to travel, especially to where we may manufacture. We want to look at producing certain parts. The supply chain mentioned previously, we have been impacted now. Some of the lead time on parts is 12 months. So you can have a 99.5% built product, but that 0.5% means it actually can't go to market. So it's very frustrating sometimes in that terms of, we have designs, we have prototypes, we want to go to mass market. We now have funding to do it, but sometimes there's something out of our control that actually restricts us from that. And travel's a big one for our production team, especially, with the physical products, not being able to touch them, oversee them. It's been quite stressful on some of the team downstairs in production. UBCO's lucky enough that we have actually got quite a strong team in place pre-COVID. So the stability internationally was there. We already had employees based in certain countries that actually managed to do the heavy lifting on our behalf. So as an investor wanting to look at it, the stability of having a global network already entrenched means that you're going to stay afloat in the short term while you ride it out.
Yeah, and you're finding that demand is still strong?
Yes, look, from my point of view as a sales and partnership director, our product is quite utilitarian, so it does transcend not only agriculture, but also our, for example, our vehicles are being used by Domino's and by farmers, for example. So we're lucky enough to have a product that isn't solely relied on the agricultural space. So There are different areas that can lift us up. So The demand is there, and obviously that comes off the back of marketing and having good product.
Awesome. Dean, the investment activity over the COVID-19 period has been pretty phenomenal, as we're talking about, and every day it seems like there's a company being bought for $1 billion or more, or maybe not every day, but certainly with far more frequency than we've ever seen in New Zealand. What are investors looking for in the agritech startups, and why is this such an opportunity for New Zealand to leverage?
I think just, in general, we know about agriculture and the supply chains alongside it. It's one of the least disrupted industries from a technology point of view, for a host of reasons. But, one of those reasons is it produces food year in, year out, and it reliably does that. So, investors, they have very similar patterns and then some unique characteristics to themselves, but investors looking for globally unique IP. We get that in New Zealand. Team, a real challenge in New Zealand. You see the successful companies have the teams that can transition to international markets. So that's a real key point. Market size, sizable enough to get venture size returns, and that's not every agri-tech market. So that's a key one. But some of the difference in characteristics come around the chemistry between lead investors and companies, and that's got to be unique. But I think one of the big ones is why now? Why now for a company? Because you can see trends in a market, like people can pick trends. That's not difficult. But what is the timing today that warrants a company receiving a large round of market that's going to propel it into that market over the next 2 years? Is there genuine market pull? Are there micro dynamics in that market that says that should happen today? And I think that differentiates between some companies that do raise investment and don't, and the level of investment and the type of investors. To me, it's about timing.
And as an investor, is there plenty of deal flow in New Zealand, or opportunities for you?
People ask me a lot about that. We're a specialised investor, so all we do is Agritech, and my answer to that's, there's not as much as there should be, and there's more than what people think. So when you do get out and you start moving around the country, and you see some really surprising companies do some surprising things. There's around 15 companies that have done, Agritech companies have done Series A plus investments in the last 4 years. So we can produce these companies, but yes, we need to do more, and we need to have a bigger pipeline, and realising investment from public research would make a big contribution to that, and all the other great initiatives that are going on as well.
Awesome, thanks, Dean. Alicia, LIC has been acting as a kind of a big brother looking to engage with startups and do some corporate venturing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and how companies could engage with LIC?
Sure thing, Greg. So we set up the LIC Accelerator Fund to support the Agritech ecosystem, and it is a strategic fund. So we're looking for companies that we can help support. The way people can get in touch is via our website. We have a section up there, and that's probably where I get most inquiries coming through. And also we attend a lot of the startup pitching type events, both globally and in New Zealand, to make sure we're on the pulse in terms of what's in development. So that's where we find a lot of our opportunities, as well as through news sources. In terms of working together and the benefits we can offer both ways. I think some of the reasons corporates like working with startup companies is they're a bit more unencumbered and free to work on things, whereas larger companies can have their sort of brand and reputation more at stake. So we're a bit more on the cautious side. And in terms of working together, we found we can support in things like R&D and trials and setting those up, distribution, especially for the New Zealand market, where we've got a strong customer base here, as well as market research, and IP advice, for example. So like in a company of our size, we've got a lot of specialist teams that can support these smaller companies get there faster.
That sounds really exciting. Lila, can you tell us a little bit about Cropsey in terms of how you got going? And I had a question there in terms of asking why startups fail, but maybe asking you why you're succeeding, and how did you get into to the business in the first place?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm one of 4 co-founders, and we started about 2018. So we're primarily focused in viticulture and vineyards. So our technology is basically a tractor-mounted imaging system that while growers are driving their tractors about doing daily operations, we're constantly monitoring the crop for them. And I guess our point of difference really is we're able to provide new value to growers because our hardware is proprietary. So we're able to collect a data set that nobody else has. And through that, we can provide new information to growers all the time. So pest and disease detection, evaluating pruning quality, finding, oh my gosh, so many things. Okay, sorry, I'll move on to the question. Basically, we got started, it was kind of a spin-off from our engineering degrees. So Ali and I were the first co-founders. We started Cropsey straight after we graduated, and we kind of thought we could use our engineering skills to better the industry.
Had you been working in the space during your degree?
So yeah, through our engineering honors project.
Yeah.
So it was sponsored by Plant and Food Research, and that's how we got introduced to the industry. It's a different project,
yeah.
But that's where we saw the issues with, growers have a lot of challenges that need solutions, and the solutions out there are only addressing maybe 1 or 2 of those issues when really they need a solution that addresses 10. So that's kind of our point of difference. And I guess as a founder, I'm glad to say I'm not speaking from experience for why startups fail, but I do think it's a combination of 2 things. A misalignment with investor expectations and technology readiness, or business models not aligning with what the end user is expecting. And I think the ecosystem is missing support for deep tech, ag tech companies. The technologies that fundamentally are transformative and not producing incremental marginal benefit, like some digital technologies. And I think digital technologies aren't really changing the world anymore. It's deep tech, and that's where the support for these companies is missing. So we got started with the help of Callahan Innovation. So most of our funding comes from the R&D grant, R&D project, R&D loan, sorry.
Awesome. And have you had further rounds some angel investors or?
Well, we're capital raising at the moment. Yeah, our first round.
Fantastic. How much are you looking to raise?
3 million.
Awesome. I think Dean's looking excited in the middle, so you should talk to him later. 200 people on the call, so have a look at Cropsey, everybody, and good luck with the capital raise, Lila. It sounds really exciting. Brendan, NZTEs are looking to support all of these companies in terms of align them with their market. What's the next big thing you think in terms of some of the key things driving from a tech space, the opportunity, e.g. like artificial intelligence or machine learning? What's NZTE seeing?
Great, thanks for that question, Greg. Look, I think the underlying story around all this is always going to be the productivity and efficiency and getting more out of the resources we have available. So all, as sort of Layla mentioned there, is some of these technology and innovations are really getting those gains in the sector. And I guess, reflecting on what Alicia was mentioning earlier on, there's increased demand to feed the world, and that's going to keep growing. And we only have a certain amount of land available to us or resources. Yeah. And that's also going to feed into the sustainability. So not the next big thing, but I think some of the areas that are absolute strengths and will continue to be in the future, and these reflect NZTE's work and what's come out of this report. So some of the solutions for the pastoral-based farming, reflecting on the report, you've got you know, the likes of Gallagher's, Waikato Milking Systems, the LIC, Datamars, Figured, Trimax, you know, and Jason talked about this earlier on, you know, it's not just an overnight success. You know, the average age of these companies is 25 years of age. So that's growing. And it's really interesting seeing the growth in the horticulture and viticulture technology with the likes of Compaq and BBC and Waima, Cropsey talking about their viticulture solutions. You know, some of those innovations growing along there. So I guess the challenge, how can New Zealand play a part in some of the growing global trends? We're seeing some things around, you know, vertical farming or sustainable farming practices, robotics and automation driven around, you know, labor shortages. So I think the next big thing is how do we possibly pitch ourselves around the solutions we've created here, which are unique to New Zealand, and position ourselves into some of those global megatrends. And then how do we help those farmers, producers integrate and make use of that advances in technology, and how do they, you know, how do they work together to help them? You know, it's great to hear these stories, but you know, following the likes of Dean and Finisterre and what they're investing in the market, where they see the trends are going, and where they're going to put their dollars to reflect on those growths. Great to hear Alicia as well talking about LIC and how they're supporting the ecosystem with their corporate structures. So, you know, I don't think it's just one big thing. It's building on what we've got and then looking at some of those other areas that we can really find a niche to play in with our skills and technology here.
Awesome. Thanks, Brendan. Jason, Biolumic's a pretty exciting company. Can you tell the audience what Biolumic has learned in its journey, and what if that applies to the tech sector so more broadly? What are some of the lessons from Biolumic's journey that you can pass on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes a little bit back to the point earlier around how it's about a medium-term game. It's about building an enduring company, as opposed to, you know, paraphrasing sort of that quick and limited profit kind of view. And so that way you're actually trying to carve a path of success to a profitable business, as opposed to we're trying to build a startup company, or we're trying to build a company that's going to raise more money soon. You're actually trying to build a business that's going to endure in no matter what way its destiny is going to play out in time, that obviously also meets your investors' expectations. But it's about a path to success. And I mean, certainly some of the things we've learned during that journey is, well, it's probably two things. One is solid foundations. And in our case, that's also very much foundational science. It goes a little bit back to what Layla was saying a moment ago, but that depth of tech, as opposed to, you know, dare I say, a shiny label on what you're doing. Of course, you need to be able to communicate the value of what you're doing in terms of your value proposition, but underneath it, there needs to be depth. There needs to be depth of the proof points. And I think, I mean, certainly a lot of NZ Agtech companies, and I'd include ourselves in this, have had to think deeply and learn a lot about how to construct proof points that don't just justify what you're doing to yourselves inside your business, but actually prove that what you're doing works, can be geared up to a higher scale in the future as well. So it's about depth in that sense. I think the other thing is a way of building that foundation, the way of building the business is people. You know, I spend in my work easily as much time, if not more, talking with my team about the team. And of course, the biology comes. So with a great team, the right people in the right jobs, then you can build that depth. And it's that depth that will help you to build an enduring company that delivers value. And I think that's definitely you know, it comes back to that endurance thing that I was talking about earlier, but that speaks to all kinds of businesses, not just Agtech ones.
So is Biolumic aligned with any university or CRI in terms of some of that deeper tech?
Yeah, we've sort of taken a two-pronged attack, I guess. You know, one is to have, let's call it semi-traditional investment from the likes of MB and Callaghan, and take the MB as an example, partnerships program there. That's worth 6 point something over 5 years. And the way that works is that a kind of a hub and spoke model. So Biolumic's in the middle with its light recipes for ag. And then around that, we have partner companies, companies like Helios Therapeutics in the cannabis space in Auckland. And then affiliated to that program are, let's call traditional science providers. Plant and Food Research is a partner of Biolumic, and also Massey. And the company was born out of Massey in part, where I was when I first came to New Zealand when we started to build the company. So we have that, but then also we are an R&D operator on our own as well. And that's really valuable, because certainly what we've seen with the likes of bringing in some of the semi-traditional non-dilutive funding is that it helps if you know what you want and you're also contributing to what you want out of that R&D outcome. You're not just, setting up the kind of work you want to be done and then allowing a provider to go away and get on with it. You really need to be, in it, boots on the ground. We've done the same thing with all of our field trialing work we've done overseas, always had our people there as well. So it's definitely a hybrid of any kind of traditional R&D model, but you need to know what you want and to be able to, ensure that the outcomes of the work meet those needs, as well as though having the availability of research inputs that you can't achieve in a lot of businesses. It could be something like access to PC2 labs for growing GM crops or whatever it might be. But there are always going to be those who are better at some of the things than you are that you want to, let's say, outsource. But a hybrid model definitely works as well for, getting you towards the goal of that mission.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Lila, are you aligned with Massey or any of the CRIs?
No, we're not actually.
So is all your tech internally generated?
Yes.
How big's the team?
We've got 6 people, all engineering and science backgrounds.
Oh, awesome. Right, I've come to the end of my questions, but before I move on, Jason, it was sounding like quite similar, I guess, in the health tech space, where people are coming up with new technology. You've got to validate, does the technology work? Does it then add value or reduce cost? And where does it fit? So from what I understand, you're saying you've got to be able to demonstrate unequivocally from third-party validation that the science effectively works.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's sort of back to that, what are some of the things that are driving innovation forward in New Zealand, and what could also potentially hold it back? And I think, I'm going to use the word a certain naivety, but it's best avoided in Agtech and also in other startups too, in terms of being driven by very limited assumptions in your value proposition. And so you might have, and certainly we would see ourselves in this space as a very new technology that may relate to other known technologies, but you have a particular specificity in what you're doing. You might view it, and it may well be unique globally. That therefore means that you've arguably got to work even harder with how you bring people on that journey with you. This is the biology, this is the science. And if it does come from something that's been in the literature and so on, you've got that as a gauge too. But it really means being very determinative about those proof points. So you're not just trying to, architect clarity around your own mindset and your business. You've actually got to be able to demonstrate that your stuff works, in those situations where it's going to provide its commercial value. And that is truly, I would say, one of the hard things in Agtech, particularly when it comes to crops, field trials, and so on. There's no such thing as a normal season, etc. So you're trying to bring clarity through your foundations and your tactics really against your strategy. You're trying to bring that clarity, and that can be a really hard journey. But I couldn't stress enough that having the clarity to be able to pursue that, it's so important, and it's going to take up a lot of your time. Comes back to team, comes back to having support from your investors, the patient capital as well as the connected capital when you're going into field trials overseas. But it's a really big deal for Agtech, particularly when you're in those crop-facing technologies.
Awesome, thanks, Jason. Talking about team, now I'm going to hand over to Brendan Bowen from the TIN team, who's got some questions from the audience.
Thanks very much, Greg. Yes, look, thank you for all the questions that are coming through in the chat box, and feel free to keep putting those in there. I'll direct some of those to some of our panelists here. What we're also going to have while these questions are going on, you're going to see a couple quick polls will be appearing on your screen. So as you listen to the discussion, feel free to fill in those, and you'll see the results will be displayed straight away. And if we've got time at the end, we'll get into have a little bit of a discussion of those at the end. Also, any questions that we don't get to in this discussion, We'll be producing a summary of this discussion on our blog afterwards, and we'll get into answering a few more of those questions then. But just for the first question that came in there was about from Emma Buchanan, any advice for how to access investors? And I thought perhaps we could start with you, Lila, as you've been chasing after them. Or do you have any advice there on how to access investors? But also, and after Layla, you've answered, if any of our other panelists want to jump in and answer this, feel free. But we'll start with you, Layla.
Yeah, wow. I guess, well, we've also been working with NZT actually, and they've been very helpful. Yeah, thanks. If you can get someone there to help you, especially if you don't know, if you're new, if you don't know anyone, talking to startups here, having warm introductions is always better. So that's where NZT can really help. But also, accelerator programs are really accessible. And now with COVID, a lot of them are actually becoming remote. So absolutely apply to those. The networks and contacts that these people have are super extensive. So we were part of StartMate and Sprout earlier this year. And I mean, that was just amazing. So, you know, once you build a few connections, yeah, everybody knows someone. So warm introductions are always the best, but I get that if you're starting out, it can be a little bit challenging. So you might need some help.
And you're just mentioning Sprout there, whether Dean, whether you have a perspective on that, advice for accessing.
I think Layla's spot on. I think if you can get a warm intro, that's great. But you know, I would receive probably a direct introduction from someone, you know, pretty much daily, and that's fine. I think investors, you know, LinkedIn, Google, there's all the digital formats. You know, I think one thing from an investor point of view is that you're looking at how the person behaves straight away, and I think seeing some entrepreneurial directness and just get engaged. You know, I think most investors are certainly open to it, and certainly in New Zealand, you can get introductions very, very quickly through your own network.
I'd probably add on to that to say it's, I guess you're interviewing the investors as much as they're assessing you. So you have to be really, really picky, I guess, on the type of investor you want, and ensuring their values and their end goals align well with yours, because it's going to be quite a long-term relationship that you're entering into. I think I've probably been most impressed by the ones that approach me directly, like Dean said, through LinkedIn or through email, and that's because, like Dean said, they're showing a bit of initiative. If you're trying to get a lay of the land, I think NZT is really well connected to the investor network. They've got some great investor managers who'll point you in the right place, and also ensure that you're investor ready and you've got all your ducks in a row.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that. I think that's a key part, is that investor ready. So a lot of times it's about how you prepare yourself before you even start talking to those investors. So thinking about what is the investor looking for, what's your commercial story, how do you get your pitch quite right. So building those connections, having someone to bounce those ideas off, be it, you know, a local incubator or support networks, because lots out there now. You think about in Auckland, Ice Angels is really well established in those groups, and building out into the other regions. So think about those networks that can help you, so you get your story really well prepared, because I think, you know, there is investment out there, and it's great seeing Finisterre come into the country with their investment partner with New Zealand Capital Partners. So it's, you know, getting yourself prepared and building those networks.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in too, team, like NZT have helped out UBCO immensely, not only in New Zealand, but globally. But I guess I need to emphasise that having a good mentor or mentors, having a group to help you in the background. We have some really good mentors here that are now at board level, and they have helped open doors to us overseas, purely from seeing how professional UBCO is, that they have staked their reputation in helping us get into places that we found it hard straight off the bat.
Great, thank you for the responses there. Another question here was about linking publicly funded research and accompanying IP into New Zealand agritech businesses, and specifically the question, how do companies want to engage, at what stage, and what sort of partnerships. Now, I know there's, I might just throw to Alicia, because of LIC's approaches, corporates working with startups. Would you have a perspective on that from the work you do?
Is this specifically in regards to IP?
Well, linking public funded research and IP, yeah. I mean, the question there about how do companies want to engage, at what stage,
Right.
and what sorts of partnerships, that I think from your approach, yeah.
I think as early as possible is best, because at that point we can provide the most direction, especially if it's something linked like operationally to what companies do. So if you get in early, you're more likely to develop the product in a way that it's most appropriate for the target market you're going after. If you get in at a later stage, it might sort of be a bit less relevant. So I guess knowing the strategic partners you're wanting to work with and getting in there early is worthwhile. And you may get told, come back when you've developed it a bit further, especially because sometimes we get approached when something is just an idea, and we might have 5 people approach us with a similar type of idea. So we may say, go away and develop it a bit further. But I think earlier the better.
Brendan, do you mind if I jump in there?
No, of course.
One of my hobby horses.
Go for it. Yep.
New Zealand spends about $500 million plus a year on public sector R&D, which is a really large amount for a country our size, and reflects that the great agricultural sector that we have here. We've been really successful at transferring that into industry. You can see that in our dairy genetics, our sheep genetics, and our forage, where we're world leaders, and that underpins our plant breeding as well. Kiwi fruit and so on has been a great example. What we're not good at is transferring that in IP into startups. And if you look around the world at Agritech and food tech, it is startups that lead the innovation, and we have a disconnect between our public sector R&D investment and getting that into startups. There's a lot of good work that's going on, everyone's trying, but we have large institutes, small, fast-moving companies, and there's disconnects there. So I'd really, for us strategically, we see this as a #1 issue for New Zealand to really focus on, with the objective that we should be absolutely world-class at transferring out of our universities, IP out of our Crown research and universities, into small, high-growth, well-invested in companies. So definitely see that as a big priority for New Zealand over the next few years.
That's definitely true, because the commercialization and the cost of launching often far outweighs the research that goes into it. So you want to make sure that the R&D you're developing is commercial before spending too long on it.
Yep. Okay. That kind of, I think, maybe picks up some of the things in another question here, which specifically regarding the industry transformation plan, which the TINS report was commissioned to provide a baseline of data on. This is a question for all the panelists about what do you think that should be the government's top 3 priorities to support the agritech sector? And you, from NZT, you may want to start on that one, Brendan.
Yeah, great. I was fortunate enough to be a part of that group that started off when the Agritech ITP was sort of drafted or launched a few years ago and consulted around the regions. And so, the ITP is built around 6 work streams around global internationalization, the data, and a couple of key things that came out of all this sort of picking on within there is, robotics. There's a bit of a niche area in New Zealand around that robotics and some of the industry, both research and commercialization. So there's some effort going around that, and that goes into that labour shortage. There's also, growing global partners. So, how do we get our products, that commercialization story, into some global partners, maybe up into the US markets, North America markets, that can really speed up that launch to commercial success and growth. And then I think, seeing what's already happened already is around that investment. With Finisterre coming into the market, growing that investment area for New Zealand startups. That's sort of where we've got to for the top three at the moment. But reflecting on some of those comments that Dean's talked about around IP rollout, how do we sort of transform the industry and grow some of these new sectors?
I'll add as well. I think an area that's getting more attention, although I'm taking a balanced view on it, is this space around new cultivation methods for crops. So we'll mention the V word, vertical farming. I mean, if we think about it in retrospect, 10 years ago in New Zealand, you couldn't get arrested trying to talk about that kind of topic with a view to cultivation opportunity. And it's still true, whatever the number is these days, that there's only 30 hectares of vertically farmed crop in the whole world. But the idea of tech stacks, where particular innovations, we're not necessarily talking about a new company going building a farm tomorrow. There's plenty of great companies doing that. But what we are talking about are key contributions to lifting the efficiencies of different cultivation methods. But that's a broad topic, right? There's crops being bred so they can grow in different seasonalities, or technologies that can help crops do so in our no such thing as a normal season. But then there's also technologies which may well go into a vertical farm operation, but may just go into a standard, high-tech greenhouse or CEA, to use the other phrases, type operation as well. But transformational technology still. So sort of stepping away from the shiny labels on things, sensors for sensors' sake, etc., but thinking more about things that could turn, let's say, a vertical farm operation from a very expensive operation to something that's actually capable of making significant profits and adding value across seasons. But a lot of that is due to, taking this sort of slightly step back view. And there are those conversations happening in New Zealand already. Some of our quite traditional, even in horticulture, some of our quite traditional but high value generating industries are thinking about, well, how could we expand our footprint offshore, expanding IP or expanding tech, not just expanding hectares within New Zealand, for example. And those kind of conversations are happening, but it's truly a space that can bring in lots of different technologies. It's not a case of just thinking you're either focused on vertical farming or you're not, and you're outside the circle. It's much more broad based than that, and it is a really big opportunity. Yeah,
and in particular in the area that we are, I think one of the top priorities we've been pushing with the government is actually subsidising. That's right down to the farmer, right through the manufacturer, whether it's a product or a service, trying to get the government to subsidise adoption at a local, regional and national level. So that's one thing that I know that we're pushing from an EV perspective. There's been four-wheel adoption, but not two-wheel adoption at the moment for EVs. So I know a lot of the farmers are screaming out to want to. One, there's not a lot of options there because manufacturers haven't had that carrot dangled in front of them to actually go for it, and the farmers don't have those options, and they're screaming for it.
Okay, I think you've probably got some polls appearing on your screen. So for those attendees who are seeing those, please do fill them in. I think we may have time for one more question here. And this one that's popped up about the panel's thoughts on approaching onshore New Zealand investors versus offshore investment when growing a global company. Do we have someone who can give a perspective on that? You were talking before, Jason, about that, but feel free to, anyone else wants to jump in?
I might quickly jump in first.
Go for it, Dylan. Yeah.
Look, from our point of view, we just did a convertible note. We wanted to raise 5 million. We raised 15. And look, some of these investors are offshore, and we realised we're focusing on the commercial side of things when we're trying to drive adoption globally. So some of our investor partners being based overseas are going to help us get into markets or reduce barriers to entry. So from our point of view, that's the way we looked at it. Was obviously we assess any type of investment and depending on where it comes from, but we've found that 3 in particular investors in this round are based overseas, and they have already opened up opportunities in different markets that we hadn't got into.
Just a quick comment, if that's okay. And I think Dylan's got it right there. I sort of don't really understand the discussion that goes on in New Zealand about onshore, offshore investors. If I was in a company, I certainly wouldn't be doing my capital strategy based on geography. I'd be looking to put the right group together, and for us, it's always an and I think, Dylan just outlined that, international investors can bring value, that connected capital, the networks. We also think it's really important to have local investors who can bear in and alongside the company. That's why we've based people here. That's why we'll look to co-invest with New Zealand investors. So I think getting the right investors for the company is the priority as against their postcode.
What Dean just said.
Ditto.
That's good. Okay. Well, let's. I think we've got time for one last question here. There's one from Tim Jackson saying, agriculture data is increasingly valuable, but is also seen as national security information. How's this impacting on opportunities for business investment and growth? That's a big question there. Wondering, Brendan, whether you wanted to have a shot at that or someone else?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges is around that ownership of data and how do you share it across the industry. I know there's some big working groups, both I know Agritech NZ are really heavy into that area, looking at that, working with the, I think MPI is leading some work around that, as the data interoperability and how you share that data. And I don't think there's any easy answers, because you do run into some of that sensitivity of data, confidentiality, ownership. So I know it's a piece being worked on. I can't give any answers, but it's trying to be tackled. Great.
Thank you for that. I think probably I might hand back to, well, unless, does anyone have any final comment on that topic?
I can.
Yes, go for it.
Yeah, sure. I think given that the scale, like the size, and it's all big data, right? The size of this data that we're getting on crops and agricultural stuff is huge, and it's kind of where Facebook was back in the day when they kind of first started. You're collecting data on all these people, and it becomes an issue later. I guess we've kind of learned our lesson from their experience, but from our perspective, the data that we collect from our growers, they actually own it, so it's all theirs. But there are, I guess, bigger questions that will come into play later as we find out more, because now we're starting to move into, not just telling the grower what's going on today, but actually forecasting and predicting what happens in the future. And then that's a whole nother challenge that we've not encountered before. So yeah, it's really still unanswered. I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Great.
Yeah, I think we still haven't yet realized the full potential of all this data. There's a lot out there at the moment, and we're working through turning the data into insights, into decision making and forecasting tools. So kind of in the middle of that journey at the moment. So there's no real direct answers and solutions yet. It's all in progress.
Great. Well, look, I'll close off the Q&A there, but we'll take all those questions that were there in the side window there, and we'll look at addressing those in our final wrap up of this session. So thank you to our panelists. I'm going to hand back to Greg now just to have some final words.
Thanks, Brendan. Wow, that was really awesome from all of our panelists, Dylan and Brendan and Jason, Dean, Alicia and Layla. I really enjoyed that. I mean, if you look at the momentum within the sector, particularly the sort of structural partnerships going on from companies like LIC, the CRIs and the universities, with some of these startup companies and the young talent coming out of them to form companies, it's very cool. I was reflecting over the conversation, those figures on angel investment and Agritech in the 2020 around 8 million, whereas between Halter and UPCO, we've got just 2 deals, 50 million this year. So exciting times, and exciting to see companies like Finisterre really help drive this growth. So thank you to our panelists. You're a great panelist. Come back to a tin event or any time, and if we can do something for you, please don't hesitate to let us know. For the audience, the report is free, so please go onto the TIN site. Probably the easiest way is just, if you don't know where it is, just Google TIN 100, go to the shop, and you can download the report for free. I'd like to thank our sponsors again, NZTE, MB, Callaghan Innovation, CEDA, Hamilton City Council, and James and Wells. The report wouldn't be possible without these organisations. So, big ups to you, and may you continue to support it. One of the things that really resonated with me as an entrepreneur, and the more long you get in the tooth, you realise that the stuff you know absolutely nothing about is a whole lot more than the stuff that you do. And so one of the things that we're endeavouring to do with TIN, with our TIN membership, is link companies together so you can talk to people who do know stuff and set up chats between CEOs and CTOs, etc. So I'd encourage you all to check out membership options on the TIN website. It's amazing what a collaborative community we have in New Zealand, and also how many smart people are around. For those of you who are TIN companies or tech companies and you haven't filled out your TIN survey, please do. The responses have been awesome this year. We've got a new survey tool. It's incredibly simple to use. So please try and fill that out this week. And then finally, the Agritech NZ AGM is this week. So is right now, in fact, at 11 o'clock. So for those who intended to go, you're a minute late. So again, thanks to our panelists, thanks to our sponsors, and thanks to you all for coming along, and the TIN team for putting this on. Thank you. Cheers.